The Ag Tribes Report is brought to you by Farm Test, a field trial design, execution, and analysis service that makes it easy to ask your fields which management practices perform best. To start your field trials, visit farmtest.ag. And Legacy Interviews, a service that video records individuals and couples telling their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family history. To learn more, visit legacyinterviews.com. Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report, a breakdown of the top stories affecting the culture of agriculture, with your host, Vance Crowe. The report begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report. I'm your host, Vance Crowe. Each week, we bring a co-host that represents a perspective of one of the many ag tribes that collectively make up the U.S. and Canadian agriculture. We review 4 news stories, discuss one of their Peter Thiel paradoxes, and then I'll ask the co-host to tell me about a worthy adversary on social media. This week, we're going to cover the state of the ag economy. It's looking pretty bad. We're going to see some of the pushback on the mandatory electronic ear tags in cattle, the dramatic changes to the Bureau of Land Management's rulemaking, and we're also going to talk about the pushback that Idaho farmers are doing after the state instituted water curtailment in the middle of the growing season. This week, I am joined by the one and only Oklahoma cattle rancher and former host of the Ag Uncensored podcast, Jerod McDaniel. Welcome to the podcast, Jerod.
Hey, Vance, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
You've been gone from the spotlight for quite some time. We will talk a little bit about that closer to the end, but first, let's jump straight into the headlines. This week, the first headline comes from the Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan. The ugly truth, 2023 and 2024 will go down as the 2 largest declines in net farm income ever. Tyne goes on to talk about how there's a silent stress growing on across America. We're talking about the low commodity prices and farmers trying to out-yield these prices, but it's looking like it is not good. There's a 25.5% decline over just last year, and there's still farmers holding on to the 2023 crop. What do you think, Jerod? Are we looking at, is it as dark as the ag papers are trying to portray it out there?
Yeah, I think that the reality is that there is a market decline in what you're going to receive, especially for crops. Cattle have kind of bucked that trend in the last 2 years. I think you kind of go back, I don't know how many years you have to go back, but let's just start with cattle. How, at one time we were killing all the cows, there was drought, everybody was screaming bloody murder that, hey, why aren't these worth more? And the market essentially just priced all the cows into the food chain, and now so many years later, we're at the double, triple price for cattle. I think we're at the beginning stages of that in grain, and it's not, the inflation pressure that everybody experiences, be it, insurance cost goes up, your cost of borrowing, everybody talks about groceries, but just the basic business costs have ramped up. And so now you've got farmers that are kind of in that same way that ranchers were several years ago, just screaming like, hey, we're not getting enough to pay to sustain this kind of deal. And I think you've got a combination of markets working to find a bottom. They say, oh, we've got plenty to go around. Whether or not that's USDA manipulation is another story, probably is. But the fact remains that for whatever part, parcel, and reason, right now, farmers are not getting enough or not getting enough of the pie. You see the grocery store prices aren't coming down, but the commodity prices that they purchase are going down. So there's a margin there that's not being handed down the food chain per se. So I think what happens is ultimately you do break a producer, you break the toy that everybody's playing with, and then it's going to take a lot of money. So you're going to have to take where we're at right now and probably have a market increase for the next 2 or 3 years of that 25-30% to get people back in the game, because it's just a matter of like, oh, we can push this so far. And at some point, you're going to push it so far that you break it. And I think that's probably what's coming up.
Yeah, if I recall, a few years ago, you were calling that there would eventually be much higher beef prices, and there were a lot of people that thought you were crazy. Seems like a lot of your predictions about the pricing came true.
Yeah, well, they're still wrong. So, I think that I really do. I think we're kind of in a similar setup. I mean, I remember, going through the drought, and actually we liquidated a big chunk of our herd and have rebuilt now in the last couple of years. But it's really a function of where the industry is going to pull the capital from. Because right now they're like, well, it's been a very successful couple of years. We can just lean on these producers. And you'll hear the argument that there's a ton of bushels unsold in the elevator. So you've got the trade or the speculators leaning on that. They're saying, well, they're going to have to sell by harvest. And the farmers are like, go to hell. Fuck off. We're not going to sell it because it's below where we want it to be. So you've got a standoff. And what's funny about it is the industry has kind of orientated itself to be like, oh, whatever the analysts say or whatever the market report you read, and they're just all kind of mockingbirds. They just say the same shit over and over. But it's that common knowledge that, oh, the farmer has to relent here. And they may have to relent, but it may also be a liquidation auction as opposed to we'll just sell it and move on. And you see a lot of farmers that are retiring. You see equipment stacking up on. The signs are all there that you got, the breaking is starting. And at some point, it's like, fine, break it. Let's break it and see who comes up on top. Because that's ultimately what it boils down to.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely seeing the prices of used equipment starting to plummet because it's just there aren't buyers for it, and then you're seeing layoffs happen in both the big markets like John Deere, but even other implement producers. So you can start to see signs that the market is breaking. We're going to move on. This is a subject that's been talked about for the last couple of weeks, and it's about electronic IDs. You brought this story up. It's one that comes from Lonesome Land's website, Jim Mundorf, and he talks about the corruption that led to mandating the electronic ID tags in cattle. So for people that are not familiar with this, the USDA a few months ago came out with a new rule saying that you must have electronic ID tags in your cattle's ears if you want to take them across state lines, if vets are going to work on them, and this caused a huge uproar. So, Jerod, when I talk to some cattle ranchers in Arizona, they say, I don't see what the big deal is. We're already using these to be able to track our vaccines. We don't like it that it's mandated, but this is inevitable. What do you think? Is this an inevitable part of the cattle market?
Well, I'd start off with the last time government got into the mandating and tracking of vaccines. That didn't turn out too well for them, but that's a whole different story. Right now, currently, there's plenty of ways to identify animals. You've got brands, you've got Bangs vaccination tags, you have multiple layers of animal identification. So the thought or the idea that you can't track an animal is just complete bullshit. That's not even reality. But what is reality is that you've got a concerted effort by the climate religious, kind of that sect of society that has decided, hey, animals are bad, which, by the way, if they're eliminating animals, that's your food source. So you by default are the carbon that they'd like to eliminate. Now, kind of backtracking from that, part of, I think, what's going on is they need a way to quantify. They've got to be able to say, hey, how many animals are within this deal? How can we assign a useful penalty to these people that are playing this game? But they don't have it because it's too fractured of an industry. There's no way to kind of line everybody up to determine where we're at in the situation. And this is a method to slip that in under the guise of look how great it'd be for everybody if we could just track this for disease. And so then they, you hear a lot has been coming up about bird flu and all this bullshit. It's been around for, I don't even know how long. If you talk to feedlot guys, they say it's been here for years. But whenever they decided they needed to implement this program, then they go find an actual, it's a solution in need of a problem. So that's kind of the preface of all that. Now you've got this rolled out, and if you look, USDA will pay, cattle organizations, your NCBAs, your state cattle organizations, they'll get money to go out and essentially be a propaganda wing for whoever is pushing this agenda. I mean, you could go deep into the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. That was kind of a precursor to a bunch of this crap. They get the validation from what they call validation by producer groups, which are essentially bought and paid for propaganda organizations now. So you get them to sign off, and then you have this kind of movement to yes, we need to do this. But every producer is screaming, hell no, we don't want this shit. but yet it still gets kind of introduced like this is such a good idea, and it actually gets passed into law. And then they'll say, well, we'll fund it. Like, we'll pay for the leash that we're going to put on you. I mean, it's asinine how people don't see what is coming down. Because as soon as you can measure, quantify, and under the guise of like tracking, well, guess what? Look, I mean, it happened in another country, and all before you know it, there's $100 per tax cow for climate. To pay your climate penance. Which, again, you go to the climate, even the beginnings of it, it's simply a farce. There's nothing to that. It's all made up bullshit. So.
Well, those are pretty bold words about some of your big groups, but I was surprised. I heard Representative Harriet Hageman from Wyoming. She was the one introducing some new legislation to say, hey, my farmers don't want this, no matter what the large organizations are saying. And one of the things she brought up was something you brought up. She said, look, they did this in Ireland where they did mandatory tagging, and then just a couple years later, they were forced to slaughter cattle in order to be able to meet climate mandates. And she said, this could happen in the U.S. I heard her give that example, and I had to be like, maybe there's a point there, because if you don't have numbers on people's herds, if you don't know what's going on, out in the rangeland, then it's harder for you to come in and say, well, we should kill off these many cows in order to be able to save us from the carbon that we're releasing.
It's a Trojan horse, and the reality is, if somebody wants to do it, the technology is already there. You can go buy EID tags. You can do that right now. No one's stopping you from doing it. I mean, if you choose to make that a method of identification, great. There's no law that says you can't do it. Everybody's free to do what they feel, but whenever you get the organization of a bureaucracy or a state or government, you get some institute that has not the vested best interest of the producers involved. Before you know it, it's just the easiest way to maintain and claim control over that industry. It's happened in every other one. Thank God, cattle have been, they have natural immunity to dumbasses, and if we allow this in, then here we go again.
Well, that's what I heard when I was at the. I don't want to represent the Arizona cattle growers, but the cattle feeders, but they ended up saying, look, if people want to do this and they get a little bump because they've got EID tags in it and that shares your vaccine records easier, fine, but don't make it mandatory. And I think that's what I'm hearing from people like Jim Mundorf. Don't if you want to do it, fine, but don't make it mandatory.
Okay, let's say you have records on all your animals, because the way this works is, as soon as you buy the tags, as you're mandated to do, you go into a database and those tags are assigned to you. Well, now once those cattle go through and they get graded, all of a sudden now you're in the record system of the packing house. You give them basically a ledger of their stuff. So every time they go to buy or purchase, they can say, well, we like this or we don't. We know these grade well, but if we can pay less for them, we will. Like, why give a competitive advantage to a monopoly cartel that has already proven that they'll do everything in their power to manipulate and, have malice intent towards the people that are their suppliers? Like, it's just, it's such a Pandora's box, and it's all passed off as just like, oh, this is wonderful. It's for the common good. Like, fuck that,
Well, let's keep moving on, because there's a whole bunch of stories this week, and one of them is far away for a lot of us. The state of Idaho, they curtailed water for at least 4 counties in Idaho right in the middle of growing season, meaning farmers had a little red tag put on their wells that said you can no longer use this well. And so farmers this week showed up with their tractors, tried to have a meeting with the governor, trying to push back on this. So you're in Oklahoma, Jerod. It is water law is a crazy thing, but it sounds like in Idaho the law is written that a lot of these farmers have junior rights, and there's not much you can do about it legally. What do you think? Are these farmers just going to have to take this on the chin?
Well, I think that they kind of, I don't know if they have an irrigation district or if they have, they've been organized at some point, which means that it's easier to collectively control them. I don't know their water law, but, as it stands, as I understand it, there was even some talk of maybe a cobalt mine, or there's other big water users that are moving into the area, or, Maybe it's an electric company that somewhere downstream they want to make more power. There's alternative people coming in, and again, using the control that is exerted by the state through bureaucracies, through policy, to manipulate and say, here's what we're going to do. Now you no longer have means to use the resource that you are have an agreement upon. At some point, and this is kind of off a little bit to the side, but at some point, either they have to decide, okay, I'm going to allow my business and my area to completely go bankrupt, or you're going to have to engage in just outright insurrection of no, go to hell. Like, if this is, because right now, if you look at the geography, they're having a ton of water up there. There's not like the shortage of water is leading to this. This is a preemptive policy, in my opinion, to shut down the usage by one group so that they can transfer that to another, which if you dig deep enough, there's probably tons of corruption that's being, backdoor handed to the politicians in charge of writing the laws. And again, if something is completely insane, doesn't make sense like this, there's probably something wrong. And then you have to ask yourself, is it really worth obeying the law about? So, rip the red tag off and start that sucker.
These farmers have a great point. Idaho is actually having one of the wettest years they've had in a long time. They are refilling their aquifer right now. And the reason this is coming up is because the head of the Water and Natural Resources changed the way they did the calculation. And so it is just a bureaucrat changing the way the calculation is occurring. So these farmers are looking at like, hey, the rain is coming down. Why are we getting less water? But the reality is they're in a state that the reason they grow potatoes there is because this is a dry area and they need that water. And a bureaucrat has the power in these 4 counties to make it so after they've already planted, after they've already sunk water into it, they may leave those crops out there to die.
Well, how convenient and how nice it is that somebody in a position of power can alter a few things that then exert the control over a mass of people that they're looking to exert more control over. I mean, it just seems like a weird circumstance, but maybe I'm off in the left there. But
well, let's head to the last story, which is one that you sent me. Lori Boyer from the Ag Information Network put out a little article that sent me down a rabbit hole about the Bureau of Land Management. About a year ago, they put in a rule that has dire implications for cattle producers. Essentially, this rule, called the Conservation and Landscape Health Rule, advocates that are putting out there say, we want to make sure that healthy landscapes, abundant wildlife habitat, clean water are on equal footing with the other Bureau of Land Management uses. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a huge amount of land that the federal government owns, and what they do is they make it possible for people to go hunting on it, to ranch, to leave your cattle out there and graze. And now they're making a change to the way they set rules that they're going to be able to use these things like healthy landscapes as a way to put forward the new rules that they put in. So, Jerod, why don't you want to put conservation and landscape health on equal footing to the rulemaking they have in the past?
Well, because I don't believe they're on equal footing to begin with. But, let's just, from a societal standpoint, this is a common theme that runs through everything. Like the feelings of let's do this feel-good practice because, somebody who lives in a and I hate to pick on people in the city, but somebody who lives in a city can then go drive through it and say, wow, how pristine. Versus the people who actually exist on that land and manage it through cattle grazing or through other means. And that's evolved over sometimes centuries, sometimes, multiple decades or centuries of land use has been discovered as this is the best use for this land, ecologically, economically, philosophically, whatever you want to do. And it's kind of the idea that, well, in order to progress in society, we need to, set aside some of this for a deeper meaning of, it's just something to placate the masses because they have now came up with this idea that, well, if we do this, it's better for everybody. It may be better for people in their voting district, and there's more of them than there is the ranchers. So I think that this is not going away. I don't think this is something that's going to stop because you can have reality and then you can have the twisted reality that is embraced by the majority, and that will overrun the minority standing there screaming, hey, this is dumb. This is really stupid. It's a bad idea. And it's where you get to the point where you have to break something before you realize the absence of it is necessary. I mean, or the absence of it is proven to be a bad thing for everybody else. Like, they don't understand what it's like.
I clearly don't have a dog in the fight because I'm not using BLM land, but I did dig pretty deep into this, and I went and watched a presentation by a group of people advocating for this. And I have to say, that presentation was stomach-turning. They were basically focused on not the rules and how exactly it was going to work. It was, we've got to get this through now before the end of the administration. You need to be calling people and get this legislation through because if the new administration changes, we're going to have to start all over again, and this is going to give us a real chance to be able to control what happens on BLM land. And that's not an exact quote, but it is pretty darn close. So I guess one thing that I'd like to finish this section out, the people that are pushing back on this is stuff like the NCBA, the National Cattlemen and Beef Association, and the Public Lands Group. So seems like some of the groups that you were not happy with are pushing back in a way that's important to you.
Well, there's probably something to gain by for them to be doing it. I mean, they have to maintain enough face to get people to pay memberships. So this is probably the one article they'll throw up and say, "Look what we did for these people." Meanwhile, they turn around and open the back door to the wolves to come in. So go take that for what it is.
Well, I mean, just for people that don't know, Jerod one time put on one of the best, it was groundbreaking at the time when there were some big issues going on in the cattle associations, and you brought on NCBA, RCAF, and I don't remember.
USCA, the Cattlemen's Association.
Yeah, U.S. Cattlemen, and they each got a chance to talk, and it was a really impactful thing. So as much as you're giving some of these big groups a hard time, you really did give everybody a chance to talk when really no other news outlet was doing that. So
yeah, well, and that's probably why I feel so comfortable. Like I actually I even had some preconceived notions, but after visiting with them and actually speaking in conversational form, I got the opinion like people say that the RCAF and Bill Buller, some of those people are crazy. I feel like that they are closer to the heart of actual beef producers than any other group, then probably followed by the U.S. Cattlemen, and then in the distant third dugout, you don't want them over there, the NCBA. But that's, you also have to realize that there's a twisted interest there with the NCBA. They're aligned with the interests of the packers too, it's not even anybody's fault. It's not like, I mean, it is somebody's fault, but at the same time, that's just the way the industry evolved. And now that it's where it is, you have to say, like, take a measured step. Like, let's look at this for really what it is and, move forward with that. But
all right. Well, those are our 4 headlines for the day. What we're going to do now is turn to our segment, The Peter Thiel Paradox, where I invite our guest to share an opinion that almost nobody in their ag tribe agrees with them on. So, Jerod, what is something you believe that almost nobody in your tribe agrees with you?
Well, I have a question. What tribe would I actually be in? I'm curious about that.
Oh, the wild cattlemen that are rough and tumble in the Oklahoma tribe. I mean, it's hard to name them exactly, but that they exist.
Well, this is probably hedging on the side of it, but most of the people in that tribe would probably agree with me, but I might go a step further. I think that you can go on a micro or macro scale either way. I think our entire society, and I'll start with like the government and authoritative entities, are essentially kind of just a farce. They're not really there to serve the citizens of the United States, nor do I believe they have their best interest. I think that it has become sort of a faux monarchy where you have these families that believe they belong in the Washington scene and they kind of hand the power around. And I think that you have intelligence agencies that have been kind of in the mix for the last several decades. And then you even have globally, you probably have, states like Israel, and you have some world players that are basically using America like their pasture to raise their warriors, in essence, and go fight your wars for them. So I think in a long way of saying it, I think that the entirety of our government and the what's ran is basically corrupt and pointless in the sense that they don't serve the citizens. And I don't know, short of a civil war of revolution, I don't know what's going to change, because if anything has been demonstrated to me, it's over the last 4 years, is that they really don't care about humanity. It's just about how can we further our interests. So.
Well, and you're living in a place where when COVID hit, you talk all the time when we chat is like they forgot about us and that wasn't a bad thing. Do you want to talk about what happened during COVID while you were down there with your family?
You bet. No, it was, you remember back whenever people forget that there were essential and non-essential workers. Well, we were in the dead middle of the essential workers, which if you really think about it philosophically, what they're saying is if this is a pandemic that's as bad as we say it is, essentially you guys are expendable because we need you for our survival. So go do the work and go expose yourself. As it turns out, everybody was going to do that anyway, regardless of their allowance or to or not to. But then they said, so a certain segment of society really isn't necessary, but you guys hold up, we'll give you some money, go play your Xbox and hang out, and we'll get back to you. But what it told me was that they need you around to essentially dig the potatoes and do the work and, grow the food, do everything that is required of, essentially, again, if you go back to like Middle Ages, the peasants needed to be out there in the fields to make sure that the people in the castles had enough food to go around. And I feel like that's kind of where we got to. And as it evolved and you saw the treatment of humans by the vaccines, the mandates, and by their fellow, citizens, if you were any part of a wake, you could see that this is like the curtain coming down. Then you get into the political side of, which is just kind of a farce to keep everybody, at each other's throats. Again, it's kind of a dance of corruption and all that put together, and it's really sorely focused using social media and everything that they can muster to throw at everybody to just keep them from really noticing the reality of what's going on. But
if people go back and listen to some of the first conversations that you and I had, I don't know, like quite a while ago, I remember you talking about the conspiratorial ideas. And at the time, I thought they seemed a lot less likely than I do now. And now you see how much the media coordinates with the government, how much they were infiltrated into our social media. And it really is astounding. The hardest part for me is to imagine that the people that I knew in D.C. are smart enough to run giant like systems where they can pull this stuff off. But, they clearly are all working together.
Well, there's layers to it. I mean, it's like different sizes of pastures of cattle. I mean, I think that's ultimately, if you look at the way they treated the citizens in the pandemic, it's how a rancher would treat cattle. Like, we need to contain these. We need to cull the ones that are going to give us a problem. We need, like the control mechanism was, you will stay here, you will do this. And now, flash forward, we're in the cycle where they still treat people like cattle. Like, we need you guys to go out there, graze, produce food, give us your offspring to go fight. They still treat people like they're cattle. The citizens are only useful to them as a service, as a servitude, however you want to say that. And that, to me, that's where it begins and ends. Like if you have that understanding of where you're at in reality, then you have to live accordingly. And back to you said, like out here, you kind of make your own laws and rules, absent the local law enforcement. You have to come here or want to be here to control it, and nobody wants to, which I'm fine with that.
That's a great place for us to wrap that section up. Now we're going to move on to the Worthy Adversary segment, where we spotlight individuals that challenge our perspective and keep us out of algorithmic echo chambers. So I know you are not on Twitter or X right now, but who is somebody on social media, Jerod, that you respect but you frequently disagree with?
Well, and yeah, it's nice to not be on social media, but back when I was, there's a guy that I used to actually read his market report for years, have tons of respect for him. Now, we actually disagreed quite a bit philosophically on some things. And again, I haven't talked to him in years, wouldn't even know if he's still on there, but a guy by the name of Ken Morrison. He used to run Morrison on the Markets newsletter. And again, not necessarily a mentor, but read his stuff for years, a great technical analyst in the commodity space. And I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, I used to really kind of disagree with him on a lot of things because you were asking, but he's a guy that I don't know if you could still follow him. I'd go give him a shout because, that's someone that, even though I disagreed with him, I definitely respected his ability as an analyst. And when you get in, earlier when I referenced it's kind of an echo chamber or mockingbirds, a lot of those, there's not a lot of independent thinkers. And the reason is, my belief is that if you stand out there and you say something that isn't kosher or isn't part of the crowd, it's much easier to castigate or say, look at what you did wrong. Whereas if you're just right there with everybody else, again, you could even put that in a holistic sense. What happened in the vaccine deal? Just go along to get along, because you don't want to be the outspoken wheel in the, it's like, why be the one that says something different? And I think it's human nature to want to be in the monoculture, essentially. But
well, he is still out on Twitter and definitely putting stuff out all the time. So Ken Morrison, and we will put him. I have a channel now, or a list in X with a list full of people cited as worthy adversaries. So he will be in there. All right, that is going to do it for this week's. Oh, well, mine is a Twitter handle called There's Another Future. And it's at Theirs and Future. And this is a person that recently came to ag and believes that they're like, I'm new to ag and I'm here to save it. But I have to say, she's got some like exciting ideas. She wants to put things out. She's curious. And I disagree with basically every one of her solutions, which always has government intervention in it. But I have to say, I'm refreshed by the fact that somebody's willing to get in there, say their perspective, share things. So There's Another Future is somebody worth just checking out, engaging, maybe telling them we don't want more regulations to save us. So, all right, that is going to do it for this week Ag Tribe Report. Jerod, before we go, I have been asked by no less than 30 people where you went and why you left Twitter. So before we sign off, would you care to tell everybody where you went?
I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and happy to be there, and I just say get bent. I'm good with it.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm so glad to have you. I want to say thanks again to farmtest.ag. That's a testing service that you can use to figure out if the methods you're using on your farms are working, and also Legacy Interviews, where we interview your loved ones to record their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family history. Join us next week for another Ag Tribes Report with guest host Dwayne Faber. So we'll be looking forward to having Dwayne on. And as always, feel free to disagree.
Thank you, Vance.